Welcome, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here today at the next in our Growing Global Networks events, which Charts is organising for the entire network. We're going to start off with some practicalities. I just want to initially describe, I'm Deirdre MacKenna. I am the International Officer for Charts. And I'm today sitting with long dark hair and a dark top on. And I'll just hand over to my colleague, Kirsten Miller, who will introduce the practical arrangements for today's session.
Hi everybody, so I'm Kirsten, and for anybody who's having trouble seeing me today, again, I'm wearing a very dark jumper that's got some light white stripes on it. I've also got dark long hair, slightly longer than Deirdre's, and I'm looking very pale from a lack of sun in Scotland, and I'm in quite a brightly lit office. So just to remind everybody that this event is being recorded, and the recording will be available to everybody online. This might take a few weeks, and we'll let everybody know who attended the session when it is available. And I just want to let you know that there's a couple of functions that are accessible for you today. We have the chat function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions or trouble with your microphone today, you can pop questions in the chat during the Q&A. We also have closed captions that are also available via the bottom of your screen. If you have any trouble accessing them, you can drop me a message in the chat, or I'll put my email in case you have any other issues accessing the event. We invite you to turn your cameras on during this event. It'd be lovely to see your faces, but we also understand that not everybody is in a private space at the minute where you have access to using your camera. Likely as well with your microphone, if you have any troubles using that, we have the chat function available. And I think that is everything for just now, and I'll hand back to Deirdre.
Thank you, Kirsten. I would also like just to mention that the event is being recorded, which is wonderful, because what we're trying to do is build up more resources, and the recording of this event will be available soon on Charts' website, should you wish to return to it or recommend the event to anybody else. So a great big welcome today, a heartfelt welcome. It's lovely to welcome our speakers, Dr. Kate Cowcher, Dr. Dominicus Makukula, Adrien Howard, Martha Kazungu, and the KNOCKvologan collaboration between Mieke van Born and Rutger Emmelkamp. And today is quite an informal roundtable. So our speakers are going to introduce themselves and very kindly share their experience and their insights on working internationally. And what we're trying to do is just really take the time to think around the motivations for developing international practice, and some of the approaches and methods involved, and how in turn international collaborations can generate impact and value for one's practice. So this event is a continuation of Charts' Growing Global Networks programme. It started in 2023, and it provides advice and opportunities to encourage and support more networked working, but also thinking about contexts and thinking about the value and significance of one's practice in different situations. Activities to date have included, as I mentioned, previously recorded webinars and an increasingly growing resource kit for you to use. These are all available on the Charts website, but also a series of commissioned projects which a number of artists undertook, some of whom are with us today, which is really lovely. One aspect of the Growing Global Networks is that, it's a very obvious natural thing for any practitioners to be doing, but in Argyll particularly, it has been inspired and fueled by the legacy of the work of Naomi Mitchison, who I'm sure is a familiar name to many of you. And we're going to hear a little bit about how the work that Naomi Mitchison undertook many decades ago is still resonating today. And Dr. Cowcher and some of our speakers will be sharing more information about that. And this really, another route that the legacy of Naomi Mitchison's international work can be seen is the Argyll collection. And the Argyll collection is a resource, a collection, which has given a lot of information and stimulus to the Growing Global Networks programme. Just to start off, I'm going to introduce Dr. Cowcher from the University of St Andrews, and then she will be succeeded by the other presenters. We'll take about 40 minutes for this, and then we'll have a short break, a very short break, and then we'll come back. We invite everybody, please, to make notes or add your questions in the chat as we go along. In preparation for the second half, which, as I said, is very much intended to be a round table. So today's event will be enriched by the contributions and the ideas that you have and that you can share with us. Okay, doke. So I'll hand over to Dr. Cowcher now.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you so much. And thank you to you and to Kirsten for coordinating today's event and for inviting me to participate. So let me just open my PowerPoint. And I'll go back a slide. Here. Okay, so as Deirdre mentioned, I'm lecturer in art history at St Andrews, and I've been working for the last couple of years on trying to pull a book together based upon research that started in 2018, looking at a very important, profoundly important cluster of East African modernist art, East and Southern African modernist art that lives in Argyll and Bute. This is a small cluster of African artworks within the wider collection that Deirdre has just mentioned, the Argyll collection, which is one of the last local authority owned educational art collections in all of the UK. So the vast majority of other local authority collections have been sold off or donated to museums, but Argyll's is still in the hands of the education department, and these days cared for and reanimated by Deirdre and her wonderful colleagues at Charts. So my connection with this collection began when I first arrived at St Andrews, and my expertise is modern and contemporary art history, but specifically an interest in East Africa. Ethiopia was where my doctoral research was based. And when I arrived at St Andrews, I was looking for artworks that I might integrate into my teaching at St Andrews, artworks in Scottish collections that would be relevant. And I have to say, probably Argyll and Bute was perhaps the last place that I expected to find what I think is one of the most important examples of African modernism in a Scottish collection. And that's this painting on the screen by Sam Ntiro, Tanzania's most famed modernist artist. He was also independent Tanganyika's first ambassador to the UK, and he was also the first African artist to have a work purchased by MoMA in New York. So he's an internationally highly significant individual. So this artwork I found on the Argyll and Bute Council website, and of course this spurred me to think, how did this work end up in the case? In this case, it was in Lochgilphead High School when I first encountered it. So this began a research project looking into not just this artwork, but the cluster of other East African artworks that were all bought around the same time. And that's how I'll whip through these slides relatively quickly. This is how I got through to the story of the Argyll collection, founded, as Deirdre mentioned, as this educational collection by Naomi Mitchison. The idea begins in the 50s and it's constituted in 1960, intended to be a collection that is to be used in rural schools on the peninsulas and islands of Argyll and Bute. And Naomi is the driving force behind it, but it is Jim Tyre, who is hired as the county art advisor in 1963, who is the one who's actually taking this work into schools. The origin of the thinking around this comes from Mitchison's broader work within Scotland on the Highland Panel and other things, in which she becomes completely convinced that accessing art in classrooms is one of the ways to inculcate a kind of sense of confidence in the world amongst young people. And her initial idea is to take Scottish artwork. So the vast majority of the Argyll collection is Scottish. But in and around the time she's founding this, she also is working in collaboration with colleagues on the African continent through a young man called Lynchway, who is in Argyll in the early 1960s, and they strike up a strong friendship. And she travels subsequently down to where Lynchway lives and becomes the chief of the Bagatla people in what is today Botswana. So she's doing these two-part projects at the same time. She's building the art collection in Argyll, and she's also traveling to Botswana. But the journey to Botswana takes her through Kampala, Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, cities that, of course, are in the midst of the era of independence and the excitement and energy of that moment. And so it's actually on the campus of Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda, where she first encounters what she later describes as the kind of immense confidence and excitement of young artists in an art school in a moment of independence. She's in Kampala less than a year after Uganda has gained its independence, and the energies at the art school are really palpable. And she decides at that moment that this art collection that was supposed to mainly be a Scottish collection for Scottish children would benefit immensely from having works bought by young African artists that might inspire a kind of wider international outlook amongst rural school children in places like Oban and Loch Gilphead and Campbelltown. And so this is the start of her collecting. She buys works at the university in Makerere. She then buys works in Nairobi, which has a thriving gallery scene, a contemporary gallery scene in the 1960s. And Dar es Salaam is where Sam Ntiro's work comes from. So amongst some of the works she buys are paintings like this, Louis Azaria and Baguni's. This was a student artwork produced when he was only about 19 or 20 years old as a student at Makerere. It's got the very brightly expressive colours that were very much part of the Makerere experimental scene in the 60s. She also buys paintings like this, like by Hesbonawiti, of ostriches. It's a very thick impasto kind of a painting. In many ways, these might seem like works that would, of course, appeal to children because they're colourful and they sometimes have animals within them, but they are connected very significantly to the sort of politics of the moment. So ostriches in particular have a whole political kind of resonance and significance in Kenya. And this work that she purchases comes from an exhibition in which Hesbonawiti also has portraits of independence era political leaders. She has a number of prints in the collection. These are all artworks that are very much owned by Argyll and Bute today, by people like Mugalula Muchibi and Catherine Gombe, who is an artist who's still alive and in her 80s in Uganda, and was very excited when we were able to reconnect with her and let her know that her student artwork had been purchased and brought to Scotland for this collection. Now, the critical thing to say about these artworks is that when I first got to look at them back in 2018, almost all of the details had been missing. The names of the artists, the titles, many of their attributions were kind of missing. And so in many ways, this is an exciting research project to try and track down all of these attributions. And you'll see from the titles here, and actually Henry Tayali's is now title known. We do know the title thanks to Deirdre's colleague in charts, who has found that that work is called In the Pub. It's been an archival journey to try to piece together the story of these artworks, but critical to that has been international partnerships and international working. And one of the critical kind of factors in unlocking this collection and its significance was connecting with colleagues at Makerere University. Here in the photograph on the right of the screen is Dr. Angelo Kakande from Makerere University, who I was very thrilled to be able to welcome to St Andrews in 2023. And he and his colleagues at Makerere were almost extremely instrumental in helping us to understand why these artworks were made, how they might have been purchased, and their significance in their context. For Mitchison, these artworks were inspiring examples of confident young sense of self in the world, and it was that energy she wanted to transport back to Scotland. One of the most amazing archival finds in this project has been this photograph on the left. It's a photograph of Sam Ntiro, whose artwork you can see on the right for scale next to Angelo there. This is a photograph that Sam Ntiro himself sent in a letter addressed to the education director in Dunoon, including this photograph alongside his artwork when he sent it to Scotland. And the discovery of this photograph was really important in my thinking, because what it revealed is that Ntiro knew very specifically that his art was going, where it was going, and he wanted very strongly to represent himself as this kind of professional artist and be kind of seen and recognized as such in the place where it was to be received. So I see this photograph as a kind of reciprocation of Mitchison's vision. So I will largely wrap up there, just saying that my own research has led to international working that I didn't necessarily expect, including wonderfully welcoming our Ugandan colleagues here to Scotland. Here's Professor Kakande. And then earlier this year, I had the pleasure of traveling to Dar es Salaam and sharing some of this work with colleagues in Dar es Salaam. We have, through our research, managed to trace some of the children, the sons and daughters of some of the artists whose work is in Scotland, including Enoch Muchibi, who's in the top left there, who I spent a wonderful day with earlier this year, and who told me rather remarkably that, amongst other things, his father was extremely interested in Scotland because the Kingdom of Buganda, in which Uganda now maps onto, was a clan, historically a clan-based society. And so he studied Scotland extensively as a place he was interested in. So the archives have revealed other interesting international connections too. I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Kate. There's so much in there. I think just this act of representation, but also, you know, of self-representation, and that choice that Sam and Ntiro made to include the photograph of himself so that he wouldn't be surrogated or substituted, I think is a really fantastic and inspiring and useful performative act of critical engagement. Also, I picked up on the note that the comment you made about Naomi Mitchison and her recognizing the energy and wanting to take that energy back into her place and reactivate there. And so just thinking about her role as an agent in making that happen, and our relationships with agents in the process of international working. These are just 2 points. Thank you very much for that. And it's a delight because your presentation is the most perfect introduction to our next speaker, Dr. Dominicus Makukula, who is going to talk to us about his practice and share some images with us as well. Dominicus, I'll pass over to you.
Dominicus, I think you're muted.
Thanks, Kate. No, I'm still not hearing you, Dominicus, so let's see if we've got some...
I think I'm on now.
Yeah, got you. Fantastic. Thank you, Dominicus.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so yeah, opening up or starting this presentation with my practice here in Tanzania, I would first like to introduce myself as art educator. I am primarily an artist. Then after training, I became an art educator. I am doing art professionally in my private enterprise, but I am doing art all the time when I am like teaching and working in the university, because here in Tanzania you have to, you know, teaching art involves studio work and the classwork. So in my practice, normally we teach here in the University of Dar es Salaam, but I can describe myself when I am like connecting with others outside the university, within the university and beyond Tanzania, as someone who is like doing what I coined as pro bono artistry. With pro bono artistry, what I'm doing mostly is like we don't take any money, or we are not paid, or I'm not paid for what I am doing, but I am connecting with a lot of as an economic activity. And looking at it that way, it's not easy to sell art. It's not easy to sell art. So those who are involved in artworks, production, mostly people who are like producing crafts, and those who have dedicated most of their time producing through making art and selling art, it's also very hard for them. So as I am subsidized as an art scholar, as an art teacher in the university, we sometimes find ourselves in having enough to go around working with others, helping them perfecting their practices. So with the pro bono artistry, I normally visit the biggest art centers and markets in Tanzania. I've been frequenting in 3 places. The biggest place I've been always visiting and working with artists is the Mwenge Arts and Crafts Center. This is the biggest arts and crafts center in Tanzania. It is located here in Dar es Salaam, in a suburb of the city itself. It's called Mwenge. That's where I hold my evening classes with the Makonde sculptors. This was started by Sam Tiro, the man Dr. Kate Cowcher spoke to you about in our presentation. He started working with this community of sculptors, Makonde sculptors, since 1980s. Until he retired in 1993, he was closely working with them. Later on, he passed the same practice to his former student, Elias Jengo, and Elias Jengo passed on this to me in the year 2008. So I am like the official curator of these artists there in that market, and I'm always there, like working with them. They ask questions. We bring in those old, carving styles that were done by the Makonde masters. We discuss them. We try to see the techniques that were used then. We are also like trying to understand what was done in the 50s, in the 60s. How is it like compared to what is happening in the present time and stuff like that. So I am working on a daily basis as an art lecturer in the university, but every Fridays in the evening from 5 p.m. sometimes to 1 or 6:30, I'm working outside the university. And during the holidays, I am also visiting a place called Arusha, where they have this big art market. In Arusha, there is a friend of Samuntiro's. He is called Samuel Kengulu. He is a retired teacher. He's also an artist. He befriended Samuntiro in the late 80s, and he is now practicing in Arusha, teaching young people. So whenever he has events about art, teaching young people, inspiring young people, trying to make sense out of things that others are doing as art, we are invited. As we are working on, private sponsorship, these activities outside the university or outside Dar es Salaam with my involvement are not regular. I am always visiting as a guest, and whenever I have time and whenever I have resources. So my practice as an artist and art teacher is always involving movement and meeting people. And this is when most of the time I connect with a lot of international artists, art collectors, art buyers, gallerists, and other artists too. And through such connections, I have been able to travel a lot. I've been traveling a lot. I've been to Kenya, I've been to Uganda when I was doing my PhD, and that's when I met Malta, and I met Keyune, Kakande, and many big names in modern arts of Uganda. I've been to South Africa, different places. The other time I went to a place I never imagined of going, it was in Madagascar, but I was invited by some small scale carvers who were doing carvings for a hotel, which later on prepared some kind of an exhibition in which they invited the artist, but also the curator who is working with them. So my practice involves movement. My practice involves communications with a lot of people, because those small scale artists, particularly painters and sculptors, they always meet customers whom they cannot really communicate very, freely because of the language barrier. So sometimes I mediate between them. They invite me, talk for them, write some briefs for their works of art, stuff like that. And most of the time, I am doing this pro bono, just like in the laws. We are not paid. But frankly, doing so has paid me a lot. I have also been involved myself as an art consultant into so many big projects. For example, currently I am working in a project of like renovating and creating 12 statues of the Maji Maji war hero. Maji Maji was a war that was fought in Tanzania in the southern part of the country when people were resisting against German colonialism from 1903 to 1907. So there is a very big park in one of these regions in the southern part of Tanzania where they have dedicated this ground to honor the heroism of these 12 chiefs who participated in that war. And I am the chief sculptor, and I'm consulting also with the company that's working to erect or to create this space. So I will stop there, and maybe I will get back into the discussion with the, my interaction with the chat, but also how I interacted with some Chiro's works of art that are displayed in the Argyll collection. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dominicus. That was really, really fascinating just to listen to how the impact of Sam Tiro's work made in, if I'm right, 1967, but let's say 60 years later, is having an impact today. Now, bear in mind, everybody, that work has been in Argyll for most of these decades. And what we're hearing here is how that artwork and the intentions of the artist behind it is still having an impact in Tanzania today. And that the impact that Dominicus is telling us about is motivating and fueling Dominicus to then go out and share that through educational activities, formal and informal. So a very, very inspiring introduction, Dominicus, and I'm sure that we'll have a lot to discuss around that in the second part of our talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deirdre.
So if I can move on now and ask artist Adrien Howard to talk to us and just introduce some of the different approaches to working internationally, and perhaps tell us a little bit about how that then comes back and changes thinking about where we work. Adrien, will I hand over to you?
Yeah, of course. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my work and also kind of the context of working internationally, and I'll touch also a little on a project that I run in collaboration with another artist called Rosie's Disobedient Press, and which is also very much an international project, but kind of based here in Scotland. I'll just make this full screen. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, so I am an artist and a writer, primarily working with poetry and sound, performance, voice, moving image, sort of. I work very much interdisciplinary. I make prints and also books, and I'm based on the Isle of Seal on the west coast in Argyll. And I think as part of my practice, I always say that I work independently, but very often I'm kind of drawn into collaboration, both through my own work and the work of others. And I think that's the thing that truly allows my practice as well to be interdisciplinary, being able to work with other practitioners with different specialities and different skills. And so this is a recent print work that became the score for an audio work, and this is a work I completed this year and was presented as part of my thesis exhibition at Bard College, which is a low residency program in upstate New York. And so for the last 3 years, I've been going to the US every summer for 2 months to do 2 months of intensive study alongside other writers, musicians, artists, sort of a cohort of almost 100 students and faculty that kind of come together for this intensive period of time. And then 10 months of the other 10 months of the year, I spend kind of at home in Argyll, developing projects and again, sort of still engaging with people, but more remotely. And this work I actually began here in Scotland. It began as a written work, and then I ended up collaborating with an artist called Richie Carey, who's based on the Isle of Skye, and 2 vocalists who work with Scottish opera to sort of reinterpret this score, which then became this 4-channel audio installation. So it was interesting to me to kind of spend sort of this intensive period writing this work and then recording and working with people here in Scotland, and then representing that just this summer as part of the thesis exhibition. And so I often work in this kind of iterative way where I'll begin with a text or an image or a drawing, and sort of reinterpret those through conversation and collaboration with other artists. And I think for me, the experience of having studied, especially in this format of the low residency program, really actually allowed me to think about how, I suppose, really allowed me to think about how I work and how I create networks, often working relatively sort of in solitude or in quiet, or sort of over very long, slow periods of time, and how I kind of sustain communication with sort of people throughout the year, which I think has been a real shift in how I approach kind of working with other people, not just those close by, but also more internationally as well. And again, I tend to often share my work through exhibitions, but also books, readings. And I think for me, again, sort of that experience of having done that program, it's sort of shifted into I guess I share my work now in a much more impromptu way, whether that's through a reading, if sort of somebody gets in touch and we'll kind of arrange something very quickly and very informally, which I think I hadn't really worked like that before. And so it's given this kind of momentum to sharing my work with other people, but also this kind of really relaxed and engaged way of working with other people as well. And I think also kind of living or being based where I am, how I engage with other artists. We tend to host a lot of people where we are. People come to visit, and so I've sort of been rethinking, for me anyway, what the idea of the studio is, or what the idea of the studio visit might be, and sort of how those conversations are structured within my practice, which has really been something that since being based in rural Argyll has really shifted, I think, as part of my work. And I sort of publish through books, so I make objects which obviously can be disseminated in a very different way to sort of a live event or an exhibition. And so for me, having these different approaches to how I share my work is really important, and also the kind of engagement that offers for other people in terms of my work, but also how I collaborate with people. I often have long correspondences with other writers and artists, which may eventually result in a work. This was a collaborative text that I wrote with a friend and an artist from a distance over a long period of time, which then the correspondence sort of formalized into this piece of writing we shared. And it just began as this very informal dialogue between the two of us, kind of sharing our research and our interests and the things that we were thinking about daily, but also in the studio and things like that. And so, yeah, I sort of another important part of my practice, I think, at the moment is actually attending residencies. This was earlier this year at Hospital Field, and kind of engaging with other artists that way. And also, yeah, that experience of kind of taking my practice and working somewhere for a short period of time, how I'm meeting people, and how that shifts sort of how I approach sort of making work. Sometimes the temporariness of being in a specific place, I find, really shifts how I approach what I'm making or what might come of that instance, but also the conversations and the people that I meet in those instances who are also coming from various different places. It also feels quite important or quite relevant to talk about another side of my practice, which is a small press publishers called Rosie's Disobedient Press that I run in collaboration with another artist, Lizette May Monroe. And we began in 2020, and it really sort of spurred out of being writers, but thinking about our writing within a visual art context and not perhaps necessarily seeing the place or the context for that within sort of the Scottish sort of visual art community that we were part of, and also as a way to sort of extend our collaboration with one another out to other people as well. So we work now with sort of ideas of expanded publishing. So we make performances and workshops, events and sort of ephemeral artworks, as well as more traditional book projects. And for us, it's really important to sort of be able to support emerging practices in Scotland, but also be able to situate them within an international or people working nationally and internationally. So we often tend to approach writers that are working sort of across Scotland, but then we will also try and situate their work next to writers based elsewhere, all over the world, really, in order to kind of, I guess, really sort of encourage that that kind of international dialogue between work. And also as part of the project, we do a lot of attending different book fairs, but also through that travel, try and do sort of continue our research there with engaging with other small press publishers, looking at different, specifically different print cultures across, different print cultures across the world. And a lot of the time, these relationships we will reach out to people in advance, but a lot of the time it's about meeting people and kind of being then sort of pointed towards projects that we may not otherwise know of. And so for me, being also facilitating kind of opportunities or facilitating a platform for other artists and practitioners is a really important part of my work. And I feel, that it really feeds into my own studio practice, being able to engage with other artists' work in that way. So it feels, although a slightly different hat for me, it feels very distinctly sort of part of my practice and wider research as well as a visual artist. I'll leave it there for now, but yeah, looking forward to talking more after.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Adrien. Gosh, again, there's a lot in there. You got me thinking for possibly the first time about how the focus, or the unique circumstances of international working can somehow justify or lead to intensely productive periods of working. That there is a different way of working than our normal kind of base camp way. But then you also raised something really fascinating. My words, absolutely not yours, but thinking about, I think normally we think that dialogues are there to support, stimulate, and enable work. But I think you were talking about actually how the work itself can be a conduit to sustaining dialogues with people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, really, really, really interesting stuff. Thank you very much, Adrien. Very much looking forward to the second part. Great stuff. So that leads us on to our next speaker, who is Martha Kazungu, who's going to talk about her role, less as a practitioner, but more as an agent. But Martha, can you tell us about how working in international circumstances enables you to fulfill your practice?
Thank you so much, Deirdre, for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak. Yes, speaking about myself as an agent, that's a very good way to describe my work, I guess, because I really wear so many hats, to be honest. And I was keenly hearing Dominicus speak about, his pro bono work and his paid work, and I rarely think about the work we do back home and how much of it is really unpaid labor, but it's really cherished work that we do, and goes a long way in making us feel satisfied or relevant in our own communities. So yeah, I like that new post of being an agent. But I'm going to speak to you about a project, a space, a concept that is really, really close to my heart, that I founded back in 2021, which is called Njabala Foundation. And I'm going to speak about this because it has enabled me be able to further project my intentions of supporting women artists, not only in Uganda, but also beyond, but also to be able to have a space where we can do multiple projects, international projects, collaborate with, experts, partners from Uganda and beyond. And I think the collaboration is sometimes almost obvious because, as you know, how the world is arranged, with so many things coming from the global north, and usually always there's this, almost inevitable rule that you have to collaborate with others to be able to sustain yourself, to get grants, and so much more. But to put everything that we do in 10 minutes, I've tried to think about this particular project that we did earlier this year, which is, a festival that we conceived to kind of think about all the different things we do as an institution, and bringing them together for a 7 days festival in Kampala, taking place in different parts of the city, having, participants, speakers, experts, both within Uganda and of course beyond. On the photo that you see right now, I think you can see Dr. Kate sitting right in front. That was the final day of the festival. I don't know why I began my talk with the last day, but yeah, that was like the festival conclusive event. It was a really beautiful evening where we had performances, where we had speeches and interactions with different Ugandan artists and art supporters from within the city. Next slide. So the foundation really has 4 major chambers, if you like. That's the exhibition aspect, the research aspect, mentorship, and then community. And on this slide, I've just kind of summarized everything, but you can, of course, if you're interested to know more about our work, you're welcome to look at our website where we have tried to, be very generous about sharing information of different photographs of different exhibitions, experiences, because until recently, we have been operating almost exclusively online. So our website was that space where we show everything we do. But as of August, we're able to inhabit a physical space, and I'm very excited to see how that, further propels our work. The next slide, please. So I have put together some photos from the festival, really random days. It was 7 days, intense days of different activations. But in thinking about the theme of this evening, about international collaborations, I was thinking about the different aspects of that kind of came together within this festival. At the core of it was a mentorship program in which, 6 curators from different parts of East Africa came to Uganda to meet their mentors, also 6 more established curators from other parts of Africa for a midpoint convening on a mentorship program that we had begun earlier on in January. And if you've been traveling internationally, you know that on the African continent, it's almost impossible to travel because the flights are insanely expensive. And many expats almost always find themselves, or ourselves now, I should also count myself, in the global north, on events, biennales, and all these kind of workshops. And at home, it's almost impossible for, experts, thinkers, curators to convene in such platforms. So it was a very, very intentional programming for me, at least, that we have a space within the festival in which, we had Tanzanians, we had Ethiopians, we had Kenyans, and of course, Ugandans curators come together to meet in this place. And it was, one of the highlights for the festival. And of course, they were able to, convene in a private space at a woman artist space called Lilian Navlime. She gave us space in her garden. And then, of course, I was able to give a talk within the festival, but also see the different activities and comment. And it was really such an interesting aspect. The festival also had exhibitions, another chamber of our work in different parts across the city. What you see on this particular slide is a small exhibition that we put in a space called the Capsule, where we invited women artists, but also men, to donate works that could be sold to support the work of our foundation. And we had a small little pop-up exhibition there. And most of these are still accessible on the website and can be purchased if people want to support our work. Yeah, we have performances, seeing the lady in the Gomesi, the blue, purple dress is giving a dance performance. Then we have someone also, Sandra Subi, also performing in another really interesting garment made out of palm leaves, which is a very traditional but rich garment that is really resonates with the local context of Kampala. Next slide, please. Furthermore, just more impressions of this festival. Of course, I talked about the community aspect. So we invited speakers. This was a round table of different experts. Tessa Bahana, the director of 30 Degrees East, which is one of the major art spaces in Kampala, Pamela Nyonu, a very prominent woman artist, Andrew Kagwa, a journalist, speaking about, the idea of a legacy, because when we speak about women artists, usually it's a lot of, vacant spaces, a lot of erasure, a lot of missing notes. So we have to be intentional now to see that, the current artists are not found in the limbo of absence, in 40 years from now. So at Njala Foundation, we try to, have this kind of conversations, create these moments where, artists register their own legacies in their different aspects of work. Next slide, please. I'm now running because of time. Yes. this slide, more aspects of the festival. So there was a performance. We invited a Nigerian best performer, Amaka Obioma, and she gave a performance in a forest in a place called Nyunguyamawe, and Dr. Kate was happy to attend this performance. We're speaking about water and what that means in different folklore in African contexts, and her coming from Nigeria, of course, it was completely different reality to Uganda. And her performance is a place that is having both water and trees, and we found ourselves somehow far away from Kampala in a very serene environment to kind of channel through her performance. On the same slide, you see Dr. Kate giving a very, very powerful talk about Evelyn Nicodemus, who is a Tanzanian modernist artist who currently living in Edinburgh. Also a very informative talk there, because like I said earlier, there's a lot of missing gaps, especially about women artists, and what we do is really to create these gaps and allow for this kind of exchanges. We have a poet, Caroline Afrima, giving a poem, and Kabera, as she calls herself, a Sowet, giving, performing while braiding another person's hair on the stage. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think the slide is just really to show where our work goes. I mean, it sounds maybe sometimes only full within our heads, but yet it goes a long way in the different experts, different communities that gather to witness the work that we do. So this was one of the events we did within the festival, which was a full house, and people were just keen to understand what everything is about. And I think the next slide is just a few it's really resources if you want to dive deeper, because we actually tried to put everything on our website, from the speakers, their biographies, to their projects. We also had produced a catalog for the festival, and this also can be purchased on our website. And yeah, so I guess last slide just for manifesting our mission. Yes, this is basically what we do, why we do, in the so many ways of this demonstrated this afternoon. The core of the work we do is really to create safe spaces for women artists to blossom. Thank you so much.
Great stuff, Martha. Thank you very much. Gosh, that was a really useful, important, helpful contribution, giving us insight, just to hear you talking as an agent, enabling opportunities for exchanges through international practices. You made me think about the constant need for your work to kind of shift or expand or modify the framing and ownership of how events are accessed. Yes, lots and lots of things going through my head, but most of all, the issue of representation, past, present, and future as well, and trying to act now to ensure that practices and issues are appropriately represented and don't just slip through the net. So that was really inspiring. Thank you very much. It's great stuff. Thanks, Martha. And that leads us on to the KNOCKvologan collaboration, which is Meeks Vanborn and Rutger Emmelkamp, who are also enabling and acting both as agents and practitioners. So can I hand over to you guys to pick up Martha's momentum, please?
Sure, and thanks so much for inviting the two of us. We'll go to the slides right away. So yeah, we run an arts hub including an art residency and our own studio on KNOCKvologan, which is on the Isle of Mull. But obviously, as you can hear, we're not from Scotland. We are from the Netherlands. You haven't guessed that. So we came here 10 years ago and as foreigners, newcomers to the island. And one of the first things we felt we had to do, because we moved here sort of early mid-career, I would say, not quite mid. We don't know how long we live, but so we basically took our network with us in terms of contacts from back home. And back home was Amsterdam, being part of the art academy there, the Rietveld Academy, sort of Glasgow School of Arts kind of gallery, art school, very international. So it was sort of natural to connect back to those people, and they would come very informally first to our house and yard, and then we did up a barn. We built a garden, and that became our playfield. The residency is an integral part of it. And the idea with the residency, and that's really significant for this presentation, it became a way to invite people to look with them at our new living environment, cultural, natural environment. So the artists that we invite have one thing in common. I mean, they're musicians, historians, anthropologists, poets, visual artists, and more. But they all research one specific aspect of this natural and cultural landscape, which allowed us to understand where we are. So there's a very simple idea, but it's sort of, 10 years in the making now. And it's for us a lifeline internationally to connect with all these people. Often these residencies become collaborations between us and them. We often function as guides, field guides, connecting artists to local community, local specialists of all sorts. So it became an integral part of our art practice.
Yeah, and one here you see that we also use the yard as a podium for talks or gatherings. This is a philosopher and animal activist Eva Meyer who gave a talk when it was just enough, just warm enough to sit outside. But we want to show you some work of a playwright from New York. Her name is Fiona Templeton, and she sent us a beautiful proposal about a Scottish bard, a female poet from the medieval times, and her name is Mari Nian Alasdair Rui, and she was silenced because as a woman she was too powerful, or she wrote down maybe dangerous things or things that were not allowed to say. But she found a very beautiful way to get her poetry through, and that was via songs and via verses for children. And Fiona is a Gaelic learner herself, and she found out that in one of those poems that when this poet was imprisoned because of her work, probably that has been on Mull, because she's describing a view to Jura, one of the other islands. So she went there and she tried to find out which room in this castle, the word castle, maybe this Mari had been locked up. But she's also trying to translate those Gaelic poems. They are translated into English, but only by English gentlemen. So she now tries to do it from more like with a more a female heart, I guess. And Fiona came already twice because this work is kind of a part of a longer work which brings her as well to Japan, because there she is studying as well the Itako women, and that are they are the blind women that are trained to be spiritual medias to talk to the to the spirits of the death, but also to the Shinto spirits. So this, yeah, well, in maybe one more year, and she will turn this all into a play, and she will perform it hopefully on Mel, but also in Japan. And this all we have another connection to Japan, and that's actually via the University of Glasgow. Graham Ito, that is also a playwright from Glasgow. He came during the lockdown. Actually, he came to the residency to make a film, because he wanted to make a film in Japan, but it was not possible at that time. And he found a play from the medieval times from a Japanese no-writer, Tenchiku, and he wrote a play about a seaweed ritual. So this play is from 1470 or 1450, probably a bit earlier. It's well, the story is too long now to tell, but every year since that time, 3 monks walk into the sea to cut some seaweed. The ceremony is called Makari Festival, and that means cutting seaweed. And we were invited together with Graham and together with a Canadian composer to witness this ceremony 2 years ago. My travel was made possible via charts. To see if we could somehow bring this back to Scotland. And we are now, this summer we have done a few workshops where we invited the community to a few different encounters where seaweed was actually the main material, but also a way of being in a dialogue. So we had, for example, a workshop that we went with kayaks just a bit on the water to study the seaweeds from above. But here you see, collectively making seaweed costumes for a parade or for a procession down to the sea to somehow honor together the sea.
This series of workshop is also a sort of a cultural investigation into the relationship between, in contemporary times, between communities, the ocean, and seaweed. So we hope that these series of workshops, which became a short film, which was still too long for this presentation, will give us an opportunity to do a much larger project, which is sort of a hybrid form between a play and community workshop kind of project for either next year or the year after. So that's ongoing. And this is the last scene of that procession, where we had a beautiful seaweed soup, a mick here in the middle, harvested some seaweed in a ritualistic way and put it in the soup, and we all ate, and people people made a wish to the ocean. So that was also an exploration into how far, how much of sort of ritual and spirituality communities currently can handle in terms of building relationship with one another and with the ocean. I think we leave it there.
That was really a double speech, our story that we wanted to tell, but.
Well, it was a really great introduction, because your practices are, I'm trying not to use the word complex, but they're manifold. You know, there are many threads and roots that overlap, and it takes us back to this thing about sustaining dialogues, and how multiple activities or multiple projects can work together to actually just sustain the practice within the dialogue. So it's really interesting. And what I was hearing when you were talking was about how you guys are constantly thinking about and constantly kind of practicing your work in multiple contexts, and how these contexts make sense of the issue in different ways and for different people. So that was a really, really, really helpful introduction to very, very rich practice. Thank you. And I'm sorry that we can't show the film, but I think that Kirsten's going to share a link to the film in the chat.
Oh, please don't, because we're working on a second edit.
That's my mistake then. Sorry about that.
It's not to be shared yet.
That's okay. Well, then we'll look forward to that being announced very, very soon. Watch the space. That's great stuff. Okay, well, thanks again to Meek and Rutger. And that closes the first part of today's event. It's been a very rich hour or so, a lot of different things to think about. You've generated a wonderful resource for everybody, all of CHART's members, thinking about international practices already. So what we're going to do in just a little 30 seconds is we're going to pause just for a wee 3-minute break. But before doing so, I'd really like to ask everybody, as I did at the beginning, please to just think about what would be valuable for you to find out more about. We have a number of questions and issues that have been raised, and I think we'll very happily have a good half hour or so discussion afterwards. But we really hope that your contributions will enrich that and deepen it as well. So I'm going to come back and I'll open up with just a little summary of some of the things that our contributors have raised, and then I'll open up with a question really about, I think, sustaining international practices. But really, from there on, I would ask everybody to get ready just to join in and make this a genuine roundtable. Okay, thanks again to all of our speakers. My clock is telling me that it's 10 minutes past. So see you back here around 13 minutes past. Okay. Okay, guys, we're just going to, I'm just sitting down again, and we'll just prepare to start the second half of our session. Kirsten's very helpfully setting up a little kind of notebook for us, because one of the things that we thought would be helpful is just simply to write down some of the keywords, and we'd also ask you to consider suggesting words that you think would be helpful to populate that thinking around international working. Great stuff. Well, in the development for this event, a number of kind of topics or themes around international working have come up, and I'll just mention them to kind of sow the seed and bring our thoughts back together. So we've talked about how. Hang on a second, I've just gone to the wrong place in my notes, excuse me. Okay, my apologies. We've talked about motivation, sustaining international practices, inspiration, resilience, all of those words. And how do you do that? How do you make yourself part of international actions when you're working either in relative isolation, you know, the nature of an individual's practice is that it's individual, or when you're not directly connected? Like, how do you bridge that gap? And yes, there's lots of practical things we know about, but it's also just about thinking about, like, how do you do that emotionally? How do you plan in the mid to long term? And, you know, the word relationship comes straight to mind there. And another aspect that's come up is just related to that. How do you just step out and make those new connections in new territories? How do you build up the courage? How do you do the research? How do you know you're going to connect with the right person, etc., etc.? What's the best way to present yourself? All sorts of issues like that. And then once you've done that, how do you keep it going? So not just how do you sustain your practice, you know, how do you apply for grants? How do you constantly send communications? But how do you sustain your practice when you can't be there? And that raises issues of representation. Who represents you? How do you, what's the basis of that relationship? And for me, a fundamental word that really merits discussion is trust. And then very importantly, I think, how does all of that actually then come back and nudge your practice forward? You know, what difference does it make? Where's the value in it? And I think that really takes us back to our starting point that I mentioned, which is all of this is about really thinking about what's the value for you, and how will it make a change in your practice. So that was just a little summary to help us kind of think about the breadth of what we're considering here collectively amongst our critical friends. And I think to start us off, I would like to ask one of our speakers, Adrien, could I ask you just to share some comments with us about how do you, what inspires you, or how do you keep your motivation going, or how do you keep yourself tough enough to undertake international work when you're just sitting on your own in your studio thinking, this is a step I want to take? What nurtures you?
I think sort of, I hope this maybe also came across in how I spoke about my work, but for me, actually, that engagement with other people is the thing that really drives me. Like, I get a lot from conversations, whether that's really informally with friends or other artists and practitioners around work, or maybe sort of more formal professional relationships that I sort of foster through my practice. And I think actually that is something that is really important to me, being based where I am. And yeah, I can often go to the studio and maybe not see somebody in person for a few days. And so actually kind of keeping other forms of communication open in that way. And I think in all honesty, for me, it was I guess have quite a slow practice. It takes me a very long time to make a piece of work. I'm not quick by any means, and sort of like rethinking how I think, yeah, how those kind of communications, or like engaging or sort of trying to share my work in different ways is sustainable for me, has really sort of actually forced me to think about the speed at which I approach things, and if in sort of very practical terms, I think something that really shifted for me was actually sort of in the midst of the pandemic, and sort of still wanting to make work and still having a real interest in the work of others. I think I just sort of really had to sort of strike up the confidence to get in touch with people who I was maybe interested in working with, or whose work interested me, or sort of I had a project in mind that I was like, oh, this person might be interested in working with me on this. And I think during that period of time, I just managed, sort of like I kind of assembled the courage to actually reach much further, I think, than I would have done before. Sort of maybe practitioners that I perhaps considered whose practice was maybe much more established than mine, or people who I'd admired for a really long time, or whose work I'd been engaged in and interested in a really long time. And actually, the reception to that, sort of, it was often kind of sort of very positive, even if somebody was like, I really don't have the capacity at the moment to take on sort of another project, or I don't have the capacity to work on it. But even the appreciation to get in touch, and also the invitation to remain in touch, even if it wasn't perhaps going to become a formal collaboration or something like that, that there was always that desire to kind of sustain that communication and appreciation to get in touch. And I know when perhaps people reach out to me, it comes in the other direction, especially if maybe I don't have a relationship with somebody already. Actually, those moments for me are really important, especially kind of given the context of my daily life and daily practice as well.
Yeah. Can I open that up? Are there others who would like to share any comments about just how do you keep it together when you're just sitting there in the studio?
Well, I think what's key that Adrien says is, very simply said, not as eloquent as Adrien himself, but it starts with a genuine interest in others, whether they're nearby or far away. Like, I think that's really beautiful from what Adrien said, is like people that you've been inspired by, and at some point you felt the urgency to reach out, whether they're much more experienced. And it's just the simple fact of being interested in other artists or other movements, then, if that's a genuine interest, then it becomes much simpler to reach out, because there's probably a genuine connection there between the practices. So it's probably recognized from the other side why somebody's contacting you. So I think that's very simple, but very strong.
And can I open that out to our full group here? I can see we've got some really, really useful comments in the chat from Nauco, which we'll work through in a minute or two. But just on the theme of how do you keep things going, would anybody like to share any previous experiences, or ask the speakers or others any questions on this theme?
Hi, Deirdre. Could I ask a question of Martha?
Hi, Mary.
Hi. Martha, thanks so much for your presentation and what looks like an absolutely amazing festival. Just on the topic of sustaining, and rather how do you have any forward vision from the festival on the curatorial relationships that were developed and how those might be sustained going forward, particularly around your creation of safe place for women artists, and then opportunities to follow on from that creation of safe space and presumably the creativity that emerges? So there's probably two questions in there.
Thank you. Yes, we've been asked several times, what next after the festival? How the things that have been able to get achieved, how are they going to be sustained? How are they going to continue? But to answer your question, there is no structure whatsoever because the festival was a one-off. It was funded by the French Institute, and you know, it was like, we are funding you for this amount of money for this amount of time, and that's it. But because the curatorial mentorship program was one of the core things, it was 6 months mentorship program in which a lot was shared. Many of the curators thought, or actually think, I think it's mostly continuing now, that it's important for them to maintain these conversations, because without this kind of convening, without this kind of arrangements, it's almost impossible to communicate on the continent. So there's no forums for curators. And they were suggesting, you know, can we just have like a forum where we can share opportunities, where we can have like an active WhatsApp group, where we can, you know, share people we should blacklist in terms of clients who are, you know, dodgy or not very transparent, because until now it's still very vague, the role of a curator in different contexts in Africa. And this vagueness almost always insists that then the work of the curator is dismissed completely and or not compensated enough. So it's a very elusive career, if you like, for many of us. And so platforms like the one we created become very, very meaningful in enabling people to share experiences from different parts of Africa, but that are kind of similar on how, you know, they have been treated by clients or how artists have been treating them or things like those. And so while we do not have like a proper structure way forward on how the things that have been, you know, coming out of these mentorship programs are going to be, you know, manifested in future, there's the participants, the curators and the mentors have expressed, you know, the need to maintain this forum as a place to share opportunities, as a place to, you know, think about the different aspects affecting the practice of curating on the continent, which I must say is still very, very much on the low, because until now, almost always you have to go to the global north to study curating. I think now there's a program in Johannesburg and in Ghana, but that's basically it. There are not so many spaces teaching curating, so there's such a big void about, you know, what is expected of curators, but also what is actually available in terms of training. So yeah, to answer your question, the participants themselves have insisted on, you know, informally continuing this sharing these platforms together, and we have a very active group of them having the things together where they share on different platforms. About you know, the festival as a whole, I really hope it can have other editions in future, but for me it's been very overwhelming to rally for support to finance such things. And we discovered that the 7 days was, you know, quite too much. Everyone was exhausted at the end of it all. So while we are happy to have more editions of it, we're also keen to know that we have the right resources, that everyone involved is, you know, is properly compensated to be able to, you know, do that task, because it's actually a lot of work that often always goes, you know, either unpaid or Yeah, so we want to be very, very careful about people's labor and energy. And so it may be a couple of years until we can rally a big enough funding to have another edition. But ultimately, there should be other editions in the future.
Oh, thank you very much, Martha. It seems to have been a great catalyst for noticing what's possible and also what needs to change. So that's got to be a huge success to have stimulated that dialogue.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I wonder if I could just ask Nauko to join us here, because Nauko, as an agent, as a curator, an enabler, an activator, this is all extremely relevant to you. But also, you've added a comment in the side, and I wonder it would be lovely just to hear from you directly.
Yes, thank you. I put a lot in, and I understand. I don't know how long the event. Do we have enough time?
Well, I just thought you might want to pick up or respond to Martha, because your comment was that you said creating safe spaces for female artists to thrive and blossom is so powerful. Is this responding to the issues identified in the local context, and are there other issues seen in the local context to which you plan to respond? So I wondered if you wanted to pick up from that, but then by all means run with your other comments. And I know that a few others have comments, but let's just, this is a round table.
Yeah. Okay. If Martha, sorry, I think just kind of skimming your website, I think you mentioned that this is a local issue. You're responding to create safe space for female artists.
Yes, yes. I think Uganda is a very patriarchal country, and so many African countries can be said of the same. But for us, it's been so bad that, you know, women artists still remain on the periphery almost in all aspects, you know, from spaces to get grants for their own work to be done or to be exhibited or things like those. And so the foundation, Javala Foundation, its core mission really is to support women artists almost exclusively. And this happens in the different things we do, depending on the capacity we have or resources we have towards us. So previously, we were founded in 2021. And, you know, depending on how much money we have, we can do different things from exhibitions to, you know, workshops to trainings, mentorships, community engagement. Recently, we began to also work with women artisans, so people who are not really in the so-called visual arts realm, but in my opinion, rightfully artists. So like it's really a very, very patriarchal space, and we have to kind of fight to create these spaces. And our website kind of gives you an overview and the different things
Yeah.
we be able to do. But the word foundation for us is a literal meaning to say this is like a platform where we can do multiple things. We're not an art space, we're not a school, but we are foundation, and we can really be as radical as we have to be to, you know, make our work be seen or valued. Yeah, so just to give you a small little anecdote as to how we were founded.
Oh, thank you so much. And if I may, one more, maybe can I ask to Dominicus, because I can probably ask question to other people when I meet next time. So in Tanzania, are there many educational programs? Because you said that you teach at school, if I remember. And I just wonder that because you are in the urban setting, I just wonder that if this, you know, if there is a art-focused educational situation, is that quite urban-centric things? And then I just wonder that what's happening in the rural part of the country. Are there demands, or are there facilities there? Or if, you know, children want to study art, what's there or what's not there? Oh, Dominicus.
I think Dominicus just rejoined us in the meeting about a minute ago. I know there has been a few internet issues recently given the current situation in Tanzania. So you might not be able to respond to this question, although he is appearing on our screen, unfortunately.
Well,
But
I wonder if we
hopefully
could
he'll come back in.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got the question. We'll make sure that we connect you with Dominicus as well. But I wonder if this is a moment just to ask Kate to come in, because while listening to you, Nauko and Martha, I was thinking about, and of course I just want to say this, you know, this is what Charts is for, and this is what all you individual practitioners can do, you know, activate your agency. But Kate, I was wondering if there were any comments that you wanted to make that would give us examples like Martha's, and that's why I knew to invite Martha today, because of that very recommendation, but about creating new kinds of spaces through collaboration, and perhaps thinking back to Naomi Mitchison's, you know, very pioneering, very determined, very resilient approach, while based in Carradale, in the south of Argyll, and effectively, and not to my knowledge calling it an international programme of exchange, but effectively enabling that, you know, one step at a time. I'd love to just hear your thoughts on this, Kate.
I mean, certainly I think recovering Mitchison and her very particular legacy in Argyll is something that I know Charts have been real champions of, and has been a real pleasure to be involved in recent years. She is, I mean, she was obviously in her lifetime a very renowned author, I mean, a very prolific author and a politician and all these other things, but specifically in Argyll, she had a very clear, very democratizing vision, which is that every child should access original artworks in their classrooms, and that particularly at the time, contemporary artworks could fundamentally alter how young people could see and engage with the world. And of course, it's then her encounters on the African continent that sort of seem to supercharge that vision a little bit. They seem to really inspire her to think that these might really kind of take that vision to the next level. I mean, the one thing to be said about that, though, of course, and this speaks a little bit to what Martha has both identified and Dominicus too, is that, you know, international working is often a very privileged way of working. It's a way of working that is easier for some people to do than for others. And even in the process of my own researching this, it was relatively easy for me to get a visa to go to both Uganda and Tanzania to further the research and to work with our partners there to try to understand this collection a bit better. And it was really hard to get Angelo Kakande's visa to come to Scotland. So there are some of these barriers, and Mitchison herself was an aristocrat and wealthy and was able to do these things. So being mindful of the certain privileges here is important, but this is also why making sure that when we think of Mitchison in Argyll, we also think of the reciprocation of her vision from somebody like Sam Antiro, who very decisively went out into the world. And Dominicus is much more of an Antiro scholar than me, but Antiro decides very decisively to be an international worker and an international presence in the 1960s. He's very mindful that the world order is dominated by both the global north, but also the Soviet Union and the United States. And he's very, very conscious about inserting himself into international conversations, participating in conferences in New York, being part of conversations in London and other places. And so in many ways, it's actually not that surprising to discover that he sends not only his painting, but his photograph of himself to Dunoon, because that self-advocacy is so important at that moment in time. So I do think recovering these visions should hopefully continue to inspire people, precisely because, you know, it has art at the center of this kind of opening up of one's perspectives.
Absolutely, and the opening up of perspectives. I think you've just, the opening up of, in 5 words, you've just summed up the whole event, about international working, and about, you know, seeing ourselves as others see us, and seeing ourselves and the value of our practice from different perspectives. And talking of others and perspectives, I wonder if maybe we should move on to representation and how international practices often is calls for a surrogate, an agent in our absence. And I wonder if not just our speakers, but everybody's here. Would anybody like to share any comments on previous experiences or on the kind of nuances and characteristics of maintaining relationships with people who act as your representative in international working?
Just answering that, Deirdre, with maybe more of a question. I feel so far we've emphasized on the social aspect of international working. You know, it's forging relationships and keeping dialogue going. We haven't touched on what artworks do when they travel. And I had a question ready for Dominicus, but also for Kate, which was about the first painting that we saw, Cutting Wood from Sam Antiro. And I was wondering if it's a coincidence that this painting, which is local people cutting forest, the painting feels a little apocalyptic, to be honest, but maybe that's me projecting it. I was just suddenly seeing that weird poetics of that painting ending up in Scotland, which of course has a massive history in not sustainable forest cutting. And of course, like Tanzania with its colonial history, I wouldn't be surprised if that cutting wood is actually a comment. But again, that might be me projecting. So I was curious to hear from either Kate or Dominicus how that relationship, sort of international relationship in that painting, how that resides and what we can learn from that, and then see what.
Dominicus, do you want to say anything, or I don't know if you're back, you should take this. Maybe if Dominicus,
Yeah, I can't speak for Dominicus, but I had a really interesting conversation with him about.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Go for it, please.
Ooh, I don't think that connection is stable enough.
Yeah. Shall I offer something and then okay, so cutting wood is it's really interesting that, as you say, when artworks travel, they take on very different kind of potential resonances where they land. And that is particularly the case, I think, with the Argyll collection works, because in Mitchison's whole vision, these things were often bought, but they arrived in Scotland with almost no knowledge or context around them. So they become very decontextualized. Intiro's practice, he was trained in Macquarie and then at the Slade in London, and he developed a style of painting that regularly depicted the living existence of the Chaga people, his people around Mount Kilimanjaro. And many of his paintings, including the one that MoMA bought in 1960 in New York, paint kind of scenes from Chaga life. And in this case, and he actually, when he first exhibited his works in London, he exhibited them all with a textual description. So they were almost kind of, documentation of his memories of this place that he had grown up. And so Cutting Wood comes with in its original iteration, the one in Argyll is a later version. There was a first version done in the 50s. The description is that the forest is managed to create new housing areas for the Chaga. So it's part of a kind of agroforestry management system that the Chaga, that is part of the Chaga life cycle. And it appears in a series alongside ones that include the making of banana beer, other kind of rites of passage. His work often has very rich flora and fauna in it, particularly flora, really. that reflects the kind of diverse ecosystem of the Kilimanjaro region. And he's very particular about a lot of the plants he includes. But this idea of seeing it as apocalyptic is fascinating precisely because it's an example of, what happens when all of the context that perhaps originally motivated its painting gets lost in international travel, and what a sort of resonance that it takes on when it arrives. I was visiting Campbelltown last year, and there's a cutting wood painting there in the Campbelltown Museum, and when I saw it, I thought, I wondered if Mitchison would have seen this painting and then found Ntiru's work interesting because they're on a similar theme. And we don't know, there's no evidence of that, but it's possible that that was kind of resonating. The final thing to mention is that Ntiru's work is made in the context of Tanzania's political moment in the 60s, which is strongly socialist oriented. And so there's a significant emphasis in a lot of his work around de-emphasizing the individual and celebrating collective labor and collective work. And so cutting wood is an example of that, a community working together. I hope that answers your Guy.
Yeah. No.
Yes, hello. Can I join, please?
Yes, please, Dominicus, do.
Yeah, sorry, we have a very huge power cut. I think it's very, very big. So the network went down and someone just connected me with his own personal account of EduRoam. I think you know this account.
Yeah. Well, thank you for persevering, Dominicus. Much appreciated. Please
yeah, so I will jump straight to my contribution on the painting itself, as you have asked. I remember there was also a colleague who asked me if we have some infrastructure for art training here in Tanzania. She was saying something like, if I am working in the city or town or in an urban area, just to share an experience about art training, art teaching, and art practices around here. So I will first jump into the Ntiru's painting, cutting wood. Then I will ask her to repeat the question if I may contribute something. I don't know what was said about cutting wood, but I remember I and Deirdre had a very long chat about the painting itself and the way and the way it should be interpreted, maybe. Yeah, looking at the painting, cutting wood itself, if you look at that painting, that is not a domestic like activity you see on the painting. It is, in the 1960s, when the means of producing energy to provide, with the to provide energy to people, and to the factory, very low. The technology was very, very low. They were depending on firewood. So it was a very, very big thing that assured people living in areas such as Kilimanjaro itself. Kilimanjaro is a very cold place, and it's very, very cold when it is rainy season or the cold season itself. So the painting is very symbolic, because had it been so that people were just cutting wood to provide themselves with or supply themselves with energy without having a system to control such a practice of producing energy, we could have not even have a single tree up there. They had a very systematic way of collecting firewood, cutting wood to supply themselves with energy, because wood is a very big source of fuel or energy in the rural areas in Tanzania. So Ntiru's painting, cutting wood, is symbolic in so many ways, as Dr. Cowcher said. It it symbolizes associationism. It symbolizes stability in the households, stability in the sense that when people are preparing firewood, it means that they want energy, they want to produce, they want to cook, they want to sustain themselves. So it's very, very symbolic the way you see it, and the way you see it in this particular painting, it is men, a lot of men cutting firewood. Had it been the system that people were like cutting firewood in such big groups, the way you see them in the painting, Kilimanjaro could have been the barren range today. But just to refresh your memory about Kilimanjaro, Kilimanjaro is one among the greenest places in Tanzania. It has massive forests. It has big afforestation projects to protect the mountain, to protect the environment, and to provide people with a source of energy. So that painting is very symbolic, and it has inspired me to do a work similar to that, as you can see in slide number, if Kerstin is helping me, I think that's slide number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Sorry,
7th slide.
I think this part we've moved on into the Q&A section, kind of panel discussion. So I'll just leave the screen as it is just now, but I'll let you speak to Naoko's question as well, which I think was around rural practices, and I guess that relates because Naoko is a rural-based artist, working in kind of the northern part of Argyll. So, Naoko, if you'd like to take the mic, I'll let you pose your question to Dominicus again.
Yeah, thank you, Kerstin. So Dominicus, in Tanzania, I remember you said that you teach, but you are living in the very large city. So I just wonder that in Tanzania, are there educational programs or schools specialized in art? And if so, then is that quite urban thing? And I just wonder that what's happening in the rural parts of the country, if younger people wanted to learn about art, the only way is they have to go to big city, or are there place to learn? Or oh dear. I think that's one thing I wanted to ask, because I recently went to Zambia, and then the power cut situation, the electricity situation is such a pain. And then when you want to collaborate with people who have that kind of issues, which has, over our control, then it's another issue to think about, really, like how we can collaborate. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
No, that was good, Naoko. Thank you for that. You're absolutely right. And again, you know, just a very special thank you to Dominicus, who's working in just such difficult circumstances just now. So we're really, really grateful for you persevering. But I'm very, very slightly conscious of time, and I wonder if we should aim to go for maybe just about 5-10 more minutes, and if I can sow a seed as we do approach the inevitable conclusion. So I want to definitely ask our presenters, but also invite everybody else, if you'd like to share just one piece of advice for somebody perhaps starting out working internationally. This has come up in the comments, and we haven't addressed it specifically. So that would be really useful. And I would also just love to hear some comments just expressing how international practice nudges one forward. Does anybody have any other questions that we haven't raised yet? We do have time. I'm just sowing the seed for our conclusion. I think I've kept up with the comments in the chat, but I may have missed some. So please keep me right. Okay. Okay, well, shall we move on? There's also, for me, I have a sort of forming question in my head about how we Charts members can work together. And I wonder if I could maybe ask Meek to consider saying something about this, because I think that KNOCKvologan, Rutger and Meek are already doing this. And I just wonder, and I know that you wear a number of different hats and have been very generous with your mentoring and your critical friendship. So before we move on to asking for a piece of advice for somebody starting out, I wonder, Meek, do you have any thoughts about or any comments about how right here in Argyll, with the people that are here today and with the Charts membership, there are things that you would just suggest or encourage us to consider doing?
Well, maybe first starting with the other question, because there's something I maybe could contribute, because I felt like over the years, sometimes being asked to participate in an international exhibition or translation or whatever, every time when I was not there myself in the exhibition far away, or even at Orkney or other places, not even so nearby, it felt afterwards a bit like, I don't know, a bit sad that it was not about meeting people or building up something. So for myself now, I think I would not so easily or so quickly say yes to something that I just have to send something without any encounter or talk or workshop or something, because that makes so much more sense to learn people in the other place, but also to share the work in a more deeper way than just, I don't know, I don't believe, I think, anymore so much in just sending things back and forwards. I think it really needs, for me and for us, what we learned here, art is so much more about the dialogue and about the afterlife of also like a work, but also about things you start together. And I think there are so many people nearby that you could collaborate with. It's just sometimes just to make to make clear that you want to do that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So I've just written on the screen there, which I hope you can see. Ask yourself which opportunities could lead to lasting, deeper impact. Yep, that's really, really helpful.
In addition to that, I think, although it's speaking from the same perspective of the KNOCKvologan studio, it's like, if you, it also comes back to how Adrien started the afternoon, the genuine interest. And if we look around to the community, and you feel you've got a subject matter that binds us, and you feel the urgency. Like one simple example, I just started a reading group for people on Mo and Iona around sort of leftist anarchist literature, using the literature from like around the planet to look very specifically about our living conditions here on this part of the world. So it's using sort of international knowledge, if you like, with an international speaker, to examine where we are and to connect, not even just within the arts. It's reaching far beyond the arts, but just connecting as human beings in this. And I just had this idea, and it's such a simple idea. It's because there is this genuine connection already, and I think if we work from those, then the chances of those relationships being lasting ones are much larger than if they were from opportunistic trying to sell a few artworks in France because there's supposedly a good market there. I'm totally with Meek there. Is that those kind of more opportunistic ones are harder to keep alive.
Absolutely. Okay, well, moving on to close things then. Could I just ask our speakers to give us their one piece of advice? Hi, Dominicus, go for it.
Yeah, I would really love to come to back to the discussion, at least to say something after I have experienced, the internet internet cuts. I would really like to respond to Naoko's question, as well as going back to the painting and say something about it, because I've prepared an entire slide. The last slide of my presentation is the answer to the wood cutting questions that popped up when I joined last.
Great
So
stuff.
can
Well,
I please hear from Naoko?
Yes, what I'm going to suggest though is that I know that quite a few of our attenders need to leave at 5, Dominicus. So
Okay.
that's okay. That's okay. That doesn't mean to say we have to finish, but I just do. I want to ask for those who do need to leave. Could our speakers just share your piece of advice about what works for you if you're starting out working internationally? Martha, what would you say? What comes to you, that just a piece of advice that you think is valuable to pass on for somebody starting working out internationally?
I think for me, what makes sense is it has to be mutual. That's something that I really want to vouch for when it comes to collaboration. Think about what's in for me, but also what's in for the other person, and articulate that. Does that then set the expectations right from the beginning? It sets the negotiations right. It basically enables a very safe environment to start with, because most of the time it's kind of uneven, so many times collaborators think that for example, flying you to New York, they think it's something that is great and beautiful, but if I'm just going to go to New York and just what do I get from that beyond fulfilling the program benefits for the person inviting me? So I think one thing, if I have to say one thing, is really thinking about mutual benefits. It's about thinking about what's in for the other person and how that then makes everything else, I think, more safe, transparent, and honest.
That's really useful. Thank you very much, Martha. Adrien and then Kate. Adrien, what piece of advice would you have that comes to your mind?
Yeah, I think yeah, I completely agree with the points that have been raised so far. And so I guess just extending that idea, for me, I think it was actually really learning to do it with intention. So often I know for kind of emerging artists, there can often be like a slew of opportunities, or kind of feel like sort of things to apply to that might enable an opportunity to begin working internationally. But I think for me, it was actually really beginning to look at what was kind of inspiring me, or work, or practitioners, whether that's artists, curators, other kinds of creative practitioners, what they were doing, where those things were kind of happening, and actually being more intentional about sort of where I was trying to engage, or sort of like embark on those international relationships, which I think as has been previously brought up, that for me is what has led to kind of more sustained relationships and more sustained ways of working, because it's built on these kind of mutual interests, but also kind of, yeah, and there's a reciprocity there that kind of comes with that intention too.
That's fantastic. That's really, really helpful, Adrien. Thank you. If I can ask Kate and then Dominicus for a recommendation about the advice she would give to somebody starting out.
Okay.
Kate, can you share your insights with us?
I mean, I think probably in the spirit of, the research journey I've been on, it's a kind of openness to unexpected things, and a willingness to be flexible, and to kind of see where the journey takes you, which I think speaks to what Deirdre and Mika and Martha have all said in terms of, and Adrien too, in terms of all these things to develop organically. I mean, and just sort of following where I mean, for me, it's where the history and the archives have kind of taken me, but that has obviously led to, you know, really wonderful contemporary conversations, not least with Dominicus, who is with us today. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Super. And Dominicus, what advice we're looking for our little snapshot to pass on to people experimenting?
Okay. Yeah, to me, I think developing relationship with everyone involved in the art practices is very, very nice, because it can help an artist, you know, creating new connections or joining existing ones. And if you make that a primary objective, you will always find yourself afloat, working with new people, working with new ideas, continuing with some ideas that were left by the others, and just, you know, increasing reach and accessibility to stuff that were never in your plate before. But, you know, creating new connections, joining new connections is all about, you know, collaborations. And, you know, the strength of international cooperation one wishes to establish will always be determined by, you know, first of all, putting forth friendship, expressing like sincere interest, and interacting with others in authentic manner, both in person and online, whenever it happens. And in order to ensure that interventions or like collaborations achieve results, and the results are channeled like effectively to strengthening the established relationship, it must be insisted that partners in the collaborations recognize one another's strengths and weaknesses. We have to understand one another. Then this means that cooperation or collaboration must produce independent partners who can each contribute to the success of one another. And artists can use, you know, several strategies to build such partnership or collaborations. You know, it's by participating in exhibitions, visiting other studios, valuing others' works, promoting their works, and working together in projects when they happen. So the other challenging thing that I must also address and advise others to look at is maintaining collaborations and mutual, you know, artistic practices in distance. It's challenging. But I think in the present technological environment, that is always a possibility you can maintain. Always, I would encourage physical presence, but, you know, given constraints financially and sometimes, you know, just barriers, I would really vouch for like constant online communications, you know, and this can be done in different occasional platforms, exhibitions, fairs, auctions, and, you know, just looking at things that interest you and of interest to the practice. So I think just also connecting to different communication platforms can really help to strengthen or put the bonds for collaborations better. Just simple communication networks, just like Facebook, you know, Messenger, live streaming, Google Calls, Zoom. It's possible. So I think virtual presence should be put forth in our current situation, and maybe just to keep afloat. Sometimes you throw a message saying hello. Yeah, what's happening there, here? You can't get to know each and everything. So by just reminding, connecting, and joining others from time to time can help. That's my advice for now.
So just, I think that's a very, very beautiful way to wrap things up, Dominicus. Just being human, and perhaps not always striving to practice as wonderful professionals, but actually being human. So thank you for that, Dominicus. And I'd really like to just read out a lovely comment from Felicity, and then I think I'll draw things to a close. And so Felicity's comment is to say thank you very much. And the message to be brave in finding your people and recognizing that nurturing relationships is as important for whatever the residency or project of the moment is, and following it on afterwards, etc. It's just a really lovely way to close things. There's more there. So just to draw things together, I just want to remind everybody that, as you're aware, you've contributed to a recording, so a massive thank you for doing that. And that recording will be available to Charts members on the website, and we can all go back to that. And please encourage everybody to go back to that as well. I personally have a few more questions, but I'm also planning in my mind that maybe these can be carried forward with the momentum to our next event. And I would ask you, just as I bring things to a close for the next 30, 60 seconds, throw any comments you've got into the chat and we'll keep them, or email myself or email Kirsten, but always reach out and keep developing those critical friendships. So an enormous thank you to our speakers, to Dr. Kate Cowcher, to Dr. Dominicus Makukula, to Adrien, to Martha, to KNOCKvologan, Rutger and Meek, to Kirsten for making all this happen. And just thank you very much. And I really look forward to keeping in touch, and best wishes to everybody. Thank you.